Thanks for listening to the Underdog podcast presented by the Riley Decker Companies. Please do us a favor and help us change and improve lives by subscribing and giving us a rating on the platform of your choice. Thank you. Well, today we have a special guest with us, Shane Snow. Welcome to the Underdog podcast.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a blessing. My mentor, we were just talking about Ryan Hawk, the Learning Leaders Show, has had you on his show 3 times, and it's an honor for you. I think it's the first podcast for you in this calendar year. You're joining us.
Yep.
It's a huge honor. So thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Yeah, I'm having less and less time to talk about this stuff these days, but I'm always excited to. And you guys have a great show, so I'm happy to be here. I'll also say, Ryan Hawk, I don't know how much he talks about Dave Matthews Band on his show. I haven't really heard him bring it up. The last time I saw him, he was on his way to like his 40th Dave Matthews Band concert. So, someone should tease him about that.
Yeah, I know. I think he needs to get back to doing more podcasts and stop listening to Dave Matthews so much.
Stop going to concerts. Yeah.
He might be on the tour van with Dave Matthews. Who knows? But I know you are. I mean, you mentioned not doing as much media because you're an extremely busy person. Entrepreneur, explorer, journalist. The name goes on. You have some of the best books out there. I love Dream Teams amongst many, Smart Cuts, the storytelling edge. But really what I wanted to focus on, and I listened to a bunch of content for us at the Underdog. The reason why, and I'll share this picture, is you really made me reminisce. You're probably like, what is this building with a truck? This is a back corner of a mall plaza. And I used to have a paper sign there. It's how we started our business. Very tough times, in the midst of a down economy, and we started a staffing business. And as I read through your book, Dream Teams, and I didn't understand your full story, but when it came to the epilogue, that last 10 minutes of the book, what I read, it impacted me almost more than any book has ever, because it told me your story, and your storytelling made a huge impact. And we'll go into how that but for me to understand your life's journey, which at times I considered an underdog moment for me in my life, was starting a business, similar, I know you had said with 2 friends and credit cards. For me, it was a back corner of a mall plaza with a paper sign, and in a very tough time in 2009. And I've done so much reflection on that moment, especially after reading your book and understanding your story of how, you went from, basically being homeless, right? Depressed, divorced, so much adversity, and going into and accomplishing so many different things in your career. So I know that was a long-winded, spewed tangent there on my end, but at the end of the day, I want to focus on you, Shane. I want to focus so that people can understand the journey of Shane Snow, not just what they see on GQ or Fast Company or the New Yorker or New York Times. What has led, I think, a lot of your stuff into a lot of your great content and insight is maybe your journey. So can you give everyone going back to, I know you said it was like the worst day of your life, how you ended that book, maybe give some insight on your life and how you kind of went from being homeless to where you are?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you. So it's funny because that was one of the hardest things I ever wrote. It had been years since then, but actually putting that story down on paper was very difficult and emotional, and also very liberating. Afterwards, feeling like, okay, I've been able to put into words this part of my story. Now I can live with it more than I thought I could. And also, you wouldn't believe, once you start sharing your story, who comes out of the woodwork to say, I've been through similar things, or I had no idea and I would have been there for you. And, that the outpouring of, I think, love and commiseration that happens when you share, a very personal story like that, is wonderful. So I'm very grateful for that. But the story that, for anyone who's listening, that's like, what is the story? The story is that I had found myself homeless. Now it's, a decade ago now. At the same time when a lot of people around the world thought that I was incredibly successful. So I had, started out, grew up in Idaho, kind of in the middle of sort of nowhere outside of a small city. And my dad was an engineer, and I grew up, brainy and nerdy, and but wanted to get out of Idaho and and move to the big city and make something of myself. And short version is I became a journalist and then an entrepreneur. And before I had turned 30, I was starting to get these 30 under 30 awards and these accolades for having started a business and helped a lot of people make a lot of money. And back home, anytime I'd come back home, people would say, "Oh, you live in New York, like you're successful, you're this and that." And it's like you get sort of put on this pedestal, and everyone has imposter syndrome. No matter where you're at, you're like, yeah, but there's other more successful people, and do I really deserve it? So that's always lingering. But I was feeling good about what I had been accomplishing at such a young age. And then some things kind of a lot of, I guess, negative potential energy had built up in my life, and things sort of unraveled all at once, where I had gotten married real young, and that relationship fell apart, and it fell apart in a way that left me like both of us very not well off, but me very, very depressed and also broke and ashamed, because where I come from, I had kind of this idea that getting divorced was a huge failure, one of the bigger failures. I come from a big family, family's everything. And of course, that's not what how my family dealt with this. They dealt with this with love. They love me, and it's like they want to make sure I'm okay. But I felt like this was a huge failure on my part as an older brother who my siblings look up to, and all of my family and community. So I was embarrassed about that anyway. And also I was very, very ashamed that the world is seeing me win these awards, and I have all of these employees, and we're helping tens of thousands of people make money through this business. The company was helping freelancers get work, and yet I here can't afford rent. And so instead of asking for help, eventually I did end up asking for help. People sort of found out what was going on, but instead, for the first several weeks, instead of asking for help or telling people what was going on, I just pretended like everything was fine. And this, I fully blame myself, but also, can you blame a person who is feeling all this pressure and kind of putting it on themselves and having to live up to this sort of picture of a person who is sort of larger than real life? And so I'm 29 years old, and I'm secretly divorced and secretly homeless, and I ended up sleeping in the office a lot. I ended up kind of crashing with friends who had vague ideas that I was going through marriage problems, not knowing that it was worse than that. And I slept in the park a few times, and I slept on the train a few times, and was just in this very, very bad spot. I'd never been so down. And the kinds of thoughts that pop in your head during that kind of experience are very, very dark. And eventually what happened is a couple of dear friends helped lift me out of that. One in particular that I mentioned in this epilogue was kind of a veteran journalist who had been a mentor of mine, and he called me up about a story he was writing, wanting to get my take. And he has this kind of great scratchy voice, and he's like, "Shane, what do you think of this thing or whatever that I'm writing about?" And then he could tell something was wrong. And I had my backpack. I was in a plaza kind of walking around New York, like on a Saturday, I think it was, where it's like, I got nowhere to go, nowhere to be. And he calls me up, and then he realizes something's wrong. He's like, "Hold on, tell me what's going on. Something's wrong." And it was the day that I finally was like, I need to talk to someone about this. And so I came out with it and broke down and, cried on the phone with this guy. And, and this is someone who really cared about me. And he was like, "First of all, you don't need to be suffering alone. Everyone goes through hard times, and you have people who love you. And it doesn't matter if, you think you're not as successful as you are. Like, that's the part that doesn't matter. The part that matters is that you're going to, you're alive, and and you're going to be part of our lives." And and he said this thing that really impacted me, which is, it's gonna suck, it's gonna hurt, and that's okay. Not it's you're going to be fine. No, like, this is going to sting for a long time, and it's going to be okay. And that is okay. And he, my favorite quote actually from him, I don't know if I wrote this down, but I can hear him say it still. Says, I'm a big believer in the institution of marriage and a bigger believer in the institution of divorce. And it's like, that's what I needed to hear at the time. And then, people helped me out. It took me a few months to be able to pay for a deposit to get back into an apartment. But meantime, one of my co-founders let me stay with him and his wife for a few weeks. And one of my kind of pseudo friends, sort of second circle friends, let me stay with him for a week. And after that, we've become very, very close friends. We talk every week to this day. And being lifted up by that. So I wrote that at the end of Dream Teams because I realized that what I needed to get through the hardest time of my life was the team of people who, I needed to loop into the problem solving, essentially, to put it in sort of business terms, team of people I needed to lift me out of this situation. That was, some of it was my own making. Some of it was just, this is how life goes. But either way, I was not going to solve this on my own. And it was opening up and letting people offer their gifts and their resources to help me through this. And that's precisely the message of Dream Teams. It's the different things we bring to the table that help us overcome the things that we can't do on our own.
Right. And I think you talk about common threads, common patterns. And one thing for the Underdog podcast, I would say, is just that those that are going through adversity, it's not, you can't be alone. You do need it. It is a team, right? To help lift you up. And I think you mentioned David Carr, and there was an apprentice, Aaron, if I got it right, the spiritual giant who helped you. And I think it just takes
she's
a village.
Amazing. Yeah. She got me into like breathing exercises, and, that's not something I'd ever done. And there's a whole lot more that she did, during that time, but it's like, you need that, the things that you don't think of that are going to help you get through or become better. Oh, yeah. Sorry to interrupt you, but thinking about her makes me really happy.
Yeah.
It was great.
And I was, fortunate enough to run into a guy named Jay Glazer this summer, through a common friend. And he just came out with a book called Unbreakable. And he does stuff for Fox Sports and football and different things. But what the whole thing, he talks about the gray, right? Those dark places that those are in a bad spot in versus, unfortunately, a lot of those folks at time will take their life, right? And I think you were, like you said, you went to some of those dark gray areas, sitting on that bench in park or in the subway. What would you say to some of our listeners that are maybe in that dark gray, dark areas like you were, other maybe, tangible things to take away? Obviously you said it takes you just reaching out, right? You just mentioned that you needed to make that, it was time to vocalize. Like what made you, was it just got to that edge where you said, hey, it's one way or the other, I needed to tell someone, and David Carr just said call, or any recommendations for someone that is going through what you went through?
Yeah. I mean, I have a couple of things to say. The first is that I can't emphasize enough how people want to see you make it. People want to see it happen. Even if, you've done things that you're ashamed of, even if you've hurt, at the end of the day, no matter what we've been through or what we've put each other through, people want to see you make it. They want to see you be okay. And I think that is human nature, but especially people who know you and care about you. The kind of person who doesn't want to see you make it is so rare. And, some people will have more capacity for, kind of being there for you when you need it, and more capacity for love than others. And I would say find those people. But yeah, I can't emphasize enough. I mean, there's a reason, even if it's strangers, suicide hotlines exist because talking to someone helps, knowing that human beings care about, you making it really helps. The other thing I'll say is, well, I have had a couple of friends who've gone through experiences like this, where they've gotten to that dark place where they're wondering, is it worth going on or not? And I think that itself is human. Like, there's nothing wrong with you if your mind goes there. I think there's psychology research around this. So, you're standing on, the top of a building and you're looking down and you're like, I could just jump. And even if you're not like, depressed, that thought pops in your head. That is like a weird, freaky human instinct, but everyone has that capacity. So like, don't freak out if you're like, if you're in such a dark place, you're like, I can't imagine a future that's better than this. That's something that, that happens. At the same time, Yeah. So two things. One is a dear friend of mine who's going through this sort of thing told me that the best thing that anyone ever told him when he was in a really dark place is you are in charge of whether you go on or not, and that's your decision. And actually, there's something empowering about that of like you have the right to, to live the life that, to live your life, and that is only something that is a decision, for you. At the same time, we all want you in our lives, and that was the advice that helped him. That might not be the advice for everyone, but I found that very empowering. That like it's we have that power. The other thing, I think, the most important thing was articulated. The most important answer I'd give to this is it was articulated by a friend of mine who just co-authored a book called "The Gap and the Gain." This Ben Hardy is his name, and I'm right now, while on the spot, I'm blanking on his co-author's name who coined this. But in this book, they articulate this idea that so much of our happiness and sort of the inverse, our lack of happiness, can be chalked up to what we're comparing our current state to. Are we comparing our current state to what it could be? The gap between where we are and where we wish we would be, which a lot of great stories are about that gap. Drama is in that, and also devastation, sadness is in that gap. And that is exactly where, looking back, that's where I was. If you look at it objectively, I'm someone who has a degree and has the capacity to get a job and has people who can, float me a couch until I can get back on my feet. I, had a company that was making money. So what if I wasn't, taking that much of a salary? Like I probably could negotiate that. I had opportunities to make it. It's not like I had to live in a dumpster forever. It's not like that's my only option. I come from a family who loves me. There's all of these things that I had, but what I was focusing on was here's where I should be. I should be the successful 30 under 30, on the cover of magazines, making millions of dollars. But where I am is I'm currently homeless and a failure, and measuring myself against that standard, all I could see was that gap. And that is incredibly depressing and disheartening. Where what the gap in the gain is about is measuring yourself against what you have gained and where you have come from. So the other side of that, I have start for me as someone who dreamed of living in the big city and building my own business. Where I had started was a kid living in farm country, moving pipe to water potatoes, and now I live in New York City, and I have built a company. I have helped all these people, and I have gotten these awards. So what if I'm not measuring up to certain things now? Like I did all of those things, and and I have gained people in my life. I have friends, I have mentors, I have people who I can call up who will help me if I ask for it, even if I'm not asking for it. I have that. I've gained so much, and so looking at your life, your position in space and time from that standpoint, here's where I've come. That paints a picture of gratitude. Or I think there are people that have a lot less than I did at that moment in my life who are much happier, and people who could see that story and say, "Why would you be so depressed?" The reason is because I'm measuring myself against this gap of where I think I should be, and there's all sorts of research on happiness that sort of backs this up. People who are doing okay in places where everyone else is doing great tend to be more depressed than people who are doing badly where everyone else is doing badly. It's like we're not measuring ourselves against this, this unequal standard. So that's what I would say. When you find yourself in that place, if you can at all look back behind you in your journey and say, what have I gained? Where did I start? Maybe you've stepped back, taken 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but that's 1 step forward from where you were. What are the things that you have to be grateful for that you have gained, even if you have lost? That I think is a very, very heartening exercise. And then adding on top of that, you have all the power in the situation. This is your life. You are the one with the power. That is very helpful. And then, people are there to help you who want to see you make it.
That's, I actually went through, like you're talking to me, through you, as far as we've had tremendous growth within our company. We're in the staffing space. I think contently, like you said, helping people find work, similar delivery as what we do. And we're having tremendous growth, but one of our, people not in the same niche, but in the same industry of staffing went to $1 billion. And so I'm sitting there thinking, well, I thought we were doing well and we went to 150 and they're heading towards $1 billion. And it's
Mhm.
just different business models, but the same thing. My gratitude. That's why I actually, when I went back, and I'm thankful that we did this, I said, you know what, like we have come a long way. My gratitude to where we are is significant, or should be a lot more significant. But like you said, the gap of what I was comparing to was
Yeah.
this $1 billion company. And then I felt like somewhat like depressed, and I should be incredibly blessed. I am
You should
incredibly
be
blessed to
celebrating.
appreciate. I should be celebrating. And I'm sitting there thinking, wow, these guys went to $1 billion and I'm at 150. But then, it's incredible, like you said, if you're not really in the right mind space or you're understanding that gap and variance, and it affected my mood, and I'm not as good as a leader if I'm not self-aware of those things, and I lose my gratitude or excitement or appreciation for those that are, working and getting and doing a great job.
Yeah. Well, and I would say so. Dan Sullivan is the author of The Gap. I think the co-author, Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy, I should say. And I think Dan Sullivan's the one that kind of coined this gap in the game term. But I will say that we're talking about underdogs. It can be very motivating to see someone who's at that billion when you're at 150 and say, I have this professional motivational jealousy of what they've accomplished. But if that's coming from a place of insecurity, of I'm not happy unless I do that, that's a different thing. I think both can exist. You can be grateful for where you've come and celebrate and focus on the gain while also being motivated by the gap.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
Good point.
that can happen at the same time, but it's it's two different things if we're talking about goals and stretching and pushing yourself, or if we're talking about making up for the inner insecurity and unhappiness.
Yeah.
So,
If the ego starts talking, well, that guy did this, and it's about, like you said, not the right. That's a great point. Thank you
yep.
for laying that out. Some other things one thing I wanted to touch upon was superordinate goals. I found that,
Mm,
in dream teams, I found that chapter to be incredibly interesting of how they all bonded together and fought for the same cause and overcome greater odds. Talk about an underdog story, right?
yeah.
Is how they banded. So maybe touch upon the actual story. I know I didn't give a whole lot of detail there, but like maybe we just talked a lot of individuals that are having, certain significant challenges in their life. What about groups, right, that need to overcome
Mhm.
longer odds, of why a superordinate goal is extremely important, and maybe touch upon that if you don't mind.
Yeah. Well, I love that you pulled that out of that's one of my favorite principles as well from the book. A lot of people like to talk about the Wu-Tang Clan stuff and some of the stories earlier on in the book.
Trust me, I wanted to talk about the Wu-Tang Clan too, but I was like, there's something about the war down there that I was just
Yeah.
fascinated with, that I had no idea. I wish I would have listened in history class.
So the brief version of the story is that the War of 1812 was a war that the U.S. fought against Britain, where the Americans almost lost the country and became part of Britain again. And the reasons are a long story, but essentially this war boiled down to whether the British could invade New Orleans, the city of New Orleans down south in Louisiana, and get upriver in the Mississippi so they could invade the US from both sides. And New Orleans was like the last city standing, and completely outnumbered by this huge British armada that was coming for them. And the short version of the story is that a group of pirates and Choctaw braves and freed slaves and lawyers and Tennessee hunters all banded together and saved the city. And the details are incredible, but basically what happened is these guys were outnumbered. I think it was like 7.5 to 1 odds, something like that. And these were groups of people that didn't like each other, or certainly didn't collaborate together. The pirates were not going to go and collaborate with the lawyers of New Orleans, and the Tennessee hunters were enemies of the American Indians, a lot of those tribes. And the freed slaves had just won their freedom and were being treated very badly by, the government of the state, even though in this part of the country, they were free and they had their own militia. And like, why should we fight to save this city that has treated us so badly? And basically what brought them together was the fact that preserving their collective home was more important than their dislike for each other, or the fact that they had different goals. And then basically what they did is they taught each other different things from the way that they built and fought. And the Choctaw warriors taught the Tennessee hunters how to do guerrilla warfare. The Tennessee hunters taught them how to shoot long rifles. And the pirates brought cannons to the city. And so all these things happened, and they shared their different heuristics for for building and fighting with each other. And that ended up being this very chaotic thing for the British to march into with their clean lines and red coats and and usual way of fighting a war. They were fighting against this band of misfits that they just after a day of fighting, the losses on the British side were so high that they gave up the war. And that's why America is owned by America now and not by the UK. And so the story is incredible, but this principle of superordinate goals is illustrated in a very dramatic way in the story. That the freed slaves of New Orleans had their own priorities. This group as a block, they didn't even have voting rights. They were trying to build neighborhoods and they had their own militia for a reason, because they were at odds with the police, and they had all of these goals. But the goal of let's not let our city be destroyed and our country, taken over by even less friendly at the time, rulers, that was a higher goal than their militia and all of those things. And same thing with the Choctaws. They're like this. We are at odds with the American government in all these ways, but we also don't want to lose our home. That story ends sadly when Andrew Jackson, was the general who was leading this, and then he went on to actually do a lot of negative things for the American Indian populations, and so that ends up with an ironic and sad ending. But at the same time, he was fighting actively against American Indian tribes, and then teamed up, despite not wanting to, with an American Indian tribe to, save the city. So, yeah, in our lives, with our teams, you're running a company, you have people from all different walks of life, and you want people from different walks of life because they are bringing different mental tools to the party, and that's going to help you overcome odds. That's exactly how the equation works. We all are bringing the same tools. Then, we have blind spots, we have missed opportunities, we have weak spots. And so, we want people in our companies to come with that. But people who are bringing different things and coming from different walks of life will have different things going on in their lives. A company full of people who are all single, and then someone comes in and they have a family. The person with the family has another priority, which is take care of the family. We're going to happy hour. We're going to stay out. We're going drinking till 8 p.m. I got to pick up my kids. Those things are at odds. And so in the moment, the superordinate goal of a group can be, or of different people within a group, can be very different things. And so as a leader of a group, your job in many ways is to establish goals that supersede everything, that allow everyone to kind of fit inside of that goal. So, the aliens are coming to take over the earth. All of our goal is to save the earth. Can you, as a leader, create structures and goals so that everyone, our goal, and this is why purpose-driven and mission-driven companies are so awesome. Our goal is to help do good in the world. That is so much more powerful than my goal of wanting to get lunch at noon instead of 12:30. Right. Helping people can be a great superordinate goal. And then I use the example of employees with families on purpose. Someone's kids and someone's spouse might be the most important thing in their life. So as long as the superordinate goal of the group does not conflict with that goal, of your family, then you're in good shape. So if my superordinate goal is my family, is to take care of my family, then underneath that, there's going to be all sorts of other things. And if that second goal of, help people and accomplish the mission of our company, which is helping take care of my family because it's getting me, an income. But if that doesn't mean I can't, be home for dinner, then we're good. So you want to make sure that the needs are met at the top of the list of goals, so that then the group can have the shared goals and press on them together. And those can overcome your goal of, wanting to have sushi for lunch instead of eating at your desk some days. And that's okay.
Yeah, no, I just fascinated. I recently got done, obviously, with your book in the last year or two, but then Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. And then we're reading as a company right now, Daniel Coyle's Culture Code. And it's so fascinating to see the dynamics of a team. And you can even relate it to sports with an underdog, or you look at the top 10 underdogs, Google it, and one is, I think, highlighting in your book, USA Hockey, right? Sometimes not the most talented individuals win. And we know that, whether it's in business and sports. But when it seems like they have that superordinate goal, that clear vision, as you said, and even if they have differences, they consistently understand, like USA Hockey, they wanted to beat the Russians, right, and win an Olympic gold, or just like this year in the Super Bowl with the Bengals, they want to, they went 4-12, and now they're vying for a Super Bowl because their quarterback and some of their people have a definitive goal, and why not us mentality, right? They're kind of going around the underdog approach. Do you feel, in a dream team or in those situations, like having what I would consider that chip on the shoulder, being the underdog, it's a must to have that superordinate goal? And is there anything else? I know you mentioned different things like intellectual humility, different other objectives within kind of your thought process that is part, if someone's in a group, company setting or small group setting, anything else that you'd want to add to that?
Yeah, great question. So the chip on the shoulder is a really interesting one, because I think that can be a very motivating, wanting to prove people wrong about you.
Right.
I think that there's a downside that, it can blind you to, doing the smart thing. Right.
Sure.
And it can lead you to take risks that either pay off, and the risk, you get the high reward, or that don't pay off. So, there's that. I think the chip on the shoulder on behalf of others can be really powerful. I want to prove people wrong about me. It can be very motivating, but then, there's this, it's got to be me that, succeeds. And that, I think, is a limiting mentality. But I want to prove people wrong about this group of people is great, because then your focus is on helping the group succeed, not helping you stand out. And I think about this with sports, and, talk about a couple of sports in the book, despite, the sports that I am into are mostly like motorsports and, skateboarding. But team sports, I think, are really fascinating. And motorsport actually is a huge team sport, but it's, it's played a little differently. Team sports like hockey and basketball and football are fascinating, because the way to win is by caring less about your individual stats than about your team stats. And that's that superordinate goal, that we want to win the Super Bowl, even if it means that I don't win the MVP, even if it means that I don't maximize, my, running, rushing yards or whatever. I think that's what you see, in the hockey story that's in Dream Teams, on both sides, both the when the Miracle on Ice happened and the Americans actually beat the Soviets in the Olympics, and when the Red Army came back, when basically this dream team of Soviet hockey players all got recruited by the NHL, and then a bunch of them ended up on the same team again. The way that they played, and what was so great about them, is their individual stats were like whatever, but their team always won. And that's, I think that's speaking exactly to it. And, you bring up intellectual humility. Intellectual humility is a subset of humility in general. It's the humility to understand that the way you think is the right way may not be the right way. and the ideas that come to you may not be the ideas that are always the best ones. They may be great, they may be the best now, but tomorrow they might not be the best ones. And you see teams that are truly, truly fantastic, like true dynasties. They tend to, have great individual players, but the individual's goal of, breaking the points record doesn't get in the way of the team's goal of winning. There's actually another great book. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I spent some time with the author. It's about, it'll come to me. I'll actually look it up while we talk. But it's about sports dynasties in history. There's sports teams that, like, for a moment, they were the greatest ever. Michael Jordan's on the Bulls, and for a couple of years, like, they smash every record. But he looked at teams that won for, 8 years.
Right.
And what is it about those teams? And there's a whole bunch of things there. One is they tend to push the boundaries of the way things are supposed to be done. They don't break the rules, but they figure out ways to, within the rules, do things differently. And another is they tend to, the one that I zeroed in on is they tend to care less about the individual stats than they do about the team stats.
Yeah.
And then, you ought to reward people based on the team stats in that case, so that the incentives are aligned.
Right.
The superordinate goal isn't you get the bonus if you personally get the big stats.
I found Shane really interesting. The Greg Popovich Spurs, he actually quantified, he was transparent that if you pass the ball, it actually will probably cost you individual money. But I think he was so transparent. So if I think they quantified it, and you might be able to help me with this, but they were talking about what it means to pass versus maybe shoot, and how that might affect your contract and different things. Anyway, he did a breakdown, and Spurs are one of those teams I think had sustained excellence with, a lot of years, a dynasty. And I found that very fascinating. And I look at, Bill Belichick or even the Nick Sabans of the world from a sports perspective, I guess. And it seems like that transparency, breeds, consistency and results of like, hey, we are all in this together. We're all going to pass because we're going to win. And even though we're not compensated that way, we're going to be unselfish because we know, hey, we all throw it on the table. We're all willing to give to get the greater good. And it seems like if they're all in that superordinate goal. But I found that he quantified that. It's like every time you pass it was like, I don't know, $8,000 or something like that. Some of these contracts are crazy, right? But there's a number that he was able to specifically even talk to his team about and said, if you pass the ball, it will probably cost you money, but this is why we need to do it. And as a greater good, we're going to win, and you might have sustainable income even personally because you're going to be on winning teams and be able to be compensated maybe long-term. And if winning's important to you, right? Or, winning gives you visibility, and then you get marketing contracts. So he was trying to, I think, quantify, try to not be
That's fascinating.
So anyway, I don't know if you knew anything about, but I found that, and I'd have to figure out where and my brain is not working. I got dad brain this morning, but
I want to look into that. I think, the thing that comes to mind for me is if you were the one in charge, wouldn't you change it so that it doesn't cost you $8,000 every time you pass, if that's in the best interest of the team?
I agree.
Or wouldn't you come in and say, you know what, I'll pay you the $8,000 back?
Right.
The book that I was blanking on the name, Sam Walker, who I love, great author. The Captain Class is the name of this particular book of his that is about sports dynasties. It's fantastic. It focuses a lot on what team captains do to create an environment where that superordinate goal of the team is actually the superordinate goal of every individual as well.
I love that. Love that. Is there we always ask book recommendations as we come towards the end here. My teams always say, hey, make sure you ask. Now I went to your website, and you have the best book recommendation. So I'm gonna put a plug in here. Go to shanesnow.com. And if you go to the book section and you look about what books, I mean, it was incredible. I have, bad ADD, and I'm sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, these are all the books I got to read. These are unbelievable. I heard this one, I did this one. And anyway, if you could say, I know you have an incredible book recommendation list for any different, recommendation from, let's just say it motivation to, fiction to this, to that. What would you say, from an underdog or maybe it's a motivation mindset? What is a book that you would recommend right now?
Yeah. Well, since we talked about David Carr earlier, I would say The Night of the Gun, which is his memoir. It's an addiction memoir. Um, is a fantastic book. I think, especially if if any of you listening here are in a dark place, he goes to the darkest of places and comes out of it, and it's so well written, and he's such a lovely person. Um, that book is fantastic, and certainly it's the story of someone who becomes an underdog, kind of because of how badly he destroys his life, and then climbs out of it, and it becomes a world famous journalist for the New York Times and a family man, and and someone who's dearly missed. I would say so. Yeah, on my book list on my site, there's a bunch of good ones, but I have a list of life changing books that is kind of at the top, and that one's on there. The Tao of Wu. So we'll put a plug in for the Wu-Tang Clan. So RZA's book, the Wu-Tang Clan, the famous rap group. The RZA was the leader, and he wrote this philosophy book / memoir called the Tao of Wu, which is unbelievable. And I tell a little bit of their story from different angles, from interviews in Dream Teams. But if you want to hear the full Wu-Tang Clan story of how they came from nothing and changed the world of music, that one is amazing. The other book I'll say that's on the list, I have too many recommendations, but I always tell people to read A Book About Love by Jonah Lehrer. That is probably the most life-changing book, the book I've recommended to more people in the last few years than any other. It's about, so he's a science writer who also went through a very dark time, and this book came out of him climbing out of his dark time. But it's about love of self and in family and with kids and relationships and God and all of these different kind of types of love that human beings experience. And it kind of tackles it from a science standpoint, and then from a here's what science can't tell us at all about this phenomenon. And it has helped me to love myself more, and understand people in a much more empathetic way. And I think for leadership, for teamwork, for family dynamics, I can't recommend something better.
No, appreciate that. Something else I was trying to figure out if I could help you. Your to-do list. I'm looking at it. You're down to some hard ones. So Shane has on his website, I'm sure you have it obviously in your personal, somewhere in your house or whatnot, is a list of things. So for instance, eat at 50 New York City pizza joint, stuff like that. But some of the ones that he has not crossed off: conduct a citizen's arrest. Hopefully you're not arresting me. Meet the U.S. president.
I'm going to do that one, but I'm excited about that one.
I think you might be able to figure out how to stand on the Brooklyn Bridge. Be in a music video. I think that's not bad. Go to space. That's a tough one. And then set the zoo animals free. I think that would be incredible. Depending on which animal you set free, I probably won't be. And then don't come to the Cincinnati Zoo. But we were trying to figure out which one I could even be of assistance. But which one do you think's your next one that's open that you're going to be able to accomplish?
So I'm a big Ryan Gosling fan, so I want to meet Ryan Gosling. That's on there. I think that one's probably, like, the circles that I'm running in now, that one's probably doable. Like, I kind of hope he doesn't see that this is on like my to-do list on my website. Like, it's sort of embarrassing. Being a music video, like, where one of the companies that I'm involved in now actually shoots music videos. So at some point I will work my way into one. Those are the two that will probably happen. I think the one of all of them is going to space. Hopefully we all live a long time, and a lot of us can go to space. Setting the zoo animals free, I'll figure out a way to set at least a zoo animal free. But object at a wedding is the one that when I made this list, it sort of is a list that's grown over the years, but it's been rather in stasis the last few years. But object at a wedding just seems like a thing to do in life that is like a human experience right there, to like go out on a limb and object at a wedding in front of people. And the problem is the only weddings I get invited to are from really good people who I want to see get married. So I just don't know if that one's ever going to happen.
You got a wedding crash. I think you can do it. I think you go and you figure out a way to wedding crash, and you just go in there and it's like the wedding crashers. You stand up. Who is that guy? Object. don't do it.
You got to find, maybe if I put this out there, like if you know someone that really should not be getting married, like these two people, for both of their sakes, this should not happen. Find me, sneak me in there, and I'll object.
I'll tell you what, if I don't plan on getting divorced or remarried, but if I do, I think I'm one and done. So if I'm about to have a second wedding, you can come to it and just say, Kyle, don't do it. Just don't do it. You could knock it off the list. Let's go to space. Let's find how to do that. You pull me, we go to space. Before we go, we hit the zoo, knock out the animals. We jump on the spaceship, and we're out rolling.
And then the pilot turns around and it's Ryan Gosling, and it all comes together.
Yeah, we're rocking it, brother. Well, I really appreciate your time today, and I hope and I know I should say someone listening, Shane, that listened to your story, potentially today you might have saved or changed someone to see someone of your success and your stature being so transparent with their challenges of the adversity you faced and your journey. What we consider underdog journey is really appreciated. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's absolutely my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Underdog Podcast. Please subscribe and rate our podcast on the Apple and Google podcast apps. See you next week on the UDP.